Well, here's an animal you don't see every day, and there's a good reason for that. Until this summer, scientists were afraid it was extinct. The video was captured in the mountains of Indonesia. It's the only place where this egg-laying mammal is believed to exist. It's called Sir David's long-beaked echidna, named for the British naturalist David Attenborough. The last time a scientist recorded seeing one of these was in 1961, and the International Union for Conservation of Nature lists this long-beaked echidna as critically endangered. So this was an exciting and pleasant surprise to researchers who recorded it for the first time on a trail camera. The animal, as you can see, is described as having the snout of an anteater, the spines of a hedgehog, and the feet of a mole. Thank you so much for kicking off a new week with the world from A to Z. I'm Carl Azus. Whether you're watching at worldatozorg or at youtube.com/@theworldatozz, we welcome you and we're thankful for you. In the United States, it was a weekend of honoring veterans. The holiday, whose history we discussed on Friday's show, pays tribute to all Americans who served in the armed forces during wartime or peacetime. Today, researchers estimate there are more than 18 million veterans alive in America. According to the Pew Research Center, 89% of them are men and 11% are women, and 73% of U.S. veterans are 50 years old or older. There's been a significant decrease in the percentage of Americans who've served in the military. In 1980, that percentage was 18. Last year, it had fallen to 6%. But one thing to keep in mind here is that today we have an all-volunteer military force. For years before 1973, there was a draft in place that required many Americans to serve. Another difference today includes an online opportunity for people to remember and share information about veterans who've passed on.
Doesn't get any easier.
At Riverside National Cemetery in Southern California, Linda Monroe makes a visit to her husband of 55 years, Bob Monroe.
He was a Vietnam veteran. Very proud of being a Marine.
As she researched Riverside ahead of his burial, she came across the Digital Veterans Legacy Memorial Project. Since then, she's crafted a page full of photos and tributes that tells the story of Bob's life in service and what's happened after. James LaPaglia is a digital services officer with the Department of Veterans Affairs. He says the goal of the Veterans Legacy Memorial Project, or VLM, which started in 2019, is to tell the stories behind the VA markers at cemeteries like Riverside.
Family members and battle buddies and friends can find their veterans in a digital space and honor them by telling stories, sharing memories.
Veterans Affairs populates online pages with military service and cemetery information. Family, friends, and others can submit photos and mementos, and the public can search and learn. Ahead of this Veterans Day, the platform doubled to nearly 10 million profiles. It includes those buried in VA's national cemeteries, Department of Defense cemeteries like Arlington National Cemetery, VA-funded cemeteries, and now those buried in private cemeteries who have a VA marker to honor their service. Linda Monroe says her husband died of pneumonia and COVID-19 in January 2021. Since then, updating Bob's page has also continued a dialogue between her and her husband with updates on grandchildren and more. Creating a more vivid portrait of the life one veteran lived and the legacy that lives on. In Washington, I'm Karen Kafa.
A world of knowledge. Which U.S. president signed the bill that changed Armistice Day to Veterans Day? Woodrow Wilson, Franklin D. Roosevelt, Dwight D. Eisenhower, Richard Nixon. The bill that changed the name of the holiday was signed in 1954 by President Dwight D. Eisenhower.
This Veterans Day, U.S. President Joe Biden took part in a traditional wreath-laying ceremony at Arlington National Cemetery and spoke to veterans and their loved ones. Experts across the globe will be closely watching a meeting he has this Wednesday with another world leader. Chinese President Xi Jinping is traveling to California. China's a rival of the United States. The two countries have been increasingly at odds over a number of issues, including China's recent shows of military force near Taiwan, an island off the eastern coast of mainland China and an ally of the United States. China wants more control over the island, which has its own government and leadership. The U.S. has been selling and in some cases giving weapons to Taiwan, an effort to discourage a possible Chinese invasion of the island, according to international observers. Amid these tensions, American officials say the main topic President Biden wants to discuss with President Xi is communication between their countries' militaries. The U.S. doesn't want there to be, quote, mistakes or miscalculations in the Western Pacific that could lead to bigger problems. Other subjects are likely to include the conflict in the Middle East and the ongoing war in Ukraine, which began when Russia invaded the neighboring country last February.
With tripod in hand and helmet secure, an engineer picks his way over fallen beams in Ukraine. His task? Digitally mapping buildings. Many areas now look like this after constant shelling. Some buildings stand black and hollow, while others are reduced to rubble. In Kharkiv, many have historic value.
There are 500 buildings due to be listed as architectural heritage. Most of them are located very densely in a central historical area, which has seen destruction and was shelled and bombed.
There's no salvaging most, but that doesn't mean the buildings can't be preserved, in a sense. A team of cultural experts and volunteers with various skills are using cutting-edge technology and 3D scans to create a digital picture of their memory. Like this fire station and tower, built in 1887, it's a monument to the Industrial Revolution.
The scanner takes 500,000 points per second. On this station alone, for example, we will have 10 million points.
By the end, there will be about 1 billion points of data for the station, its interior and exterior. That information will be pieced together on a computer.
These files will later be used for analysis, for example, the structural analysis of the buildings.
This data helps assess the destruction, but will also be useful in creating 3D models for museums in the future, crucial to preserving Ukraine's culture.
Maybe they were not so attentive to our cultural heritage before, but when you lose it, it hurts.
On this date in world history. On November 13, 1775, during the American Revolution, General Richard Montgomery led American forces in the capture of Montreal, Canada from the British. Weeks later, though, General Montgomery was killed trying to take Quebec, and the Americans retreated to New York. On this date in 1982, the Vietnam Veterans Memorial was dedicated in Washington, D.C. Thousands of veterans who'd fought in the conflict marched to the site. The V-shaped black wall was initially inscribed with the names of almost 58,000 troops who gave their lives during the conflict. America's involvement in Vietnam lasted from 1957 to 1975. And on November 13, 2015, in Paris, a series of organized terrorist attacks killed at least 130 people. The assaults were carried out by the Islamic State terrorist group, whose positions in Syria were later targeted by French warplanes. Midlothian, Texas sounds familiar somehow. We hear that Mrs. Allen's class is watching there in the Lone Star State. Great to see Midlothian Heritage High School tuning into the world from A to Z. Heading just a little bit northwest to Edmonton, Alberta, Canada, we've got Mrs. Myler's class online, and we're excited to see everyone from STEM Collegiate. Bears are well known for stealing food from campsites, but one recently took things a step further in Orlando, Florida. After a family there had an Uber Eats order delivered, a black bear just strolled up and snatched $45 worth of Taco Bell. Now, some might wonder, how do you spend $45 on Taco Bell? But either way, after the bear made its slow getaway, the family only seemed mildly surprised, but still hungry. Wasn't exactly a Sonic getaway or a Panda Express, but it got more than a Pizza Hearty food after dunking in and out like a Jack in the Box. We don't know if it shared with Five Guys, flexed like Popeyes, or took the subway back to Old McDonald's farm to eat. We've never KFC'd that before, but whether you'd call it sparrowing or a steal of a meal, we know that the bear was basking after robbing. I'm Carl's Jr. Azus, snacking on some puns on the world from A to Z. Means the world to have you watching.